Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. I apologize for the slightly later stream than I would have liked, but I really needed a nap after work. And as always, please let me know if the streaming is working all right for you. Audio quality, video quality, stability, all that jazz. We're continuing on basically what is an unofficial part 4 of our Snapdragon X Elite launch coverage. We are getting now a slightly more comprehensive image. We did, for example, get more gaming benchmarks when looking at a video at the end of last stream. Right now, we finally have the comparison that, in my opinion, has always been the more relevant one, which is comparing the Snapdragon X Elite to Apple's M3 Pro, not Apple's base M3, because that is just like, yes, it might make some sense when it comes to power consumption. Not the power consumption, that's the metric where it makes the least sense. It might make some sense if you're looking purely at pricing of devices, because the Snapdragon X Elite is pretty aggressively priced. But when you compare the actual processors, when you think how many cores it has, how much bandwidth, well, granted, on bandwidth, the X Elite really ain't great for a chip with 12 cores, but that's another issue. When you compare especially the power consumption metrics, this is where you really, if you are intellectually honest, should arrive that the actual competitor to it is the M3 Pro, not the base M3. In some ways, it might actually rival the power consumption of the M3 Max, but this is where we are then so far beyond. It's a much larger die. It's way more expensive for devices. It's comparable, sure, if you're trying to just like really on a scientific basis compare like the sheer raw performance that, for example, Apple can get out of a similar amount of cores or 16 versus 12. But yeah, that's neither here nor there. We do have the M3 Pro, which is 6 plus 6 cores. That's obviously still like less than the X Elite's like raw 12 performance cores, but still a little bit better than like the M3's 4 plus 4, even the M4's 4 plus 6, and of course then the M3 Max's 12 plus 4. I'm seeing some people are leaving hearts in the live chat. As always, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, leave comments. I loved how lively the live chats were over the last couple of videos, and share the video to anybody who you think might enjoy this. And of course, if you want to support this channel directly, you can leave a super chat or a super sticker right when you catch me live, and you can subscribe to my Patreon. Link is in the description of this channel. So without further ado, I want to say thank you to Vadim on Twitter, who allowed me to react to this video. Granted, the way that I react to videos, I usually don't have to ask, right? But and I did react to many videos without having any issues with YouTube copyright or whatever. But from time to time, I do like to get like somewhat fresh permission, especially if I tend to like abuse a certain content creator. And I've reacted a lot recently to the Max Tech guys, so thank you to Vadim and Max here, doing a lot of thorough comparison. I have voice criticism. Just because they allow me to react doesn't mean that I will treat them with kid gloves, but of course a level of gratitude and just peer behavior here is absolutely necessary, because if it weren't for that kind of permission, I wouldn't be doing this, or I would be doing this with a lot of people being very angry at me and just hoping that I eventually get blocked by YouTube, which of course is not what I'm looking for either. So let's get started. This is a comparison between the Snapdragon X Elite Surface laptop and of course Apple's M3 Pro MacBook Pro. Now those devices do have a little bit of a price difference that would in general benefit the Surface. However, the Surface laptops are kind of the most expensive X Elite products right now. I know there's like one above that, like is it like that HP Omnibook or something like that? But in general, if once you configure those with a hefty amount of RAM and storage, you also have to consider that you don't get the highest end X Elite. So yeah, I would in general say that they are definitely right now at least the more expensive X Elite devices on the market. Obviously, Apple's M3 Pro MacBook Pro starts at $2,000 MSRP. However, it should be noted that it's pretty easy to get it at around 1,800 or maybe at worst 1,850 through websites like Amazon. It's pretty usually discounted. I've discussed it time and time again where I say that in probably the last decade, maybe even throughout their entire existence, but Apple has mastered the art of overpricing their devices just a tiny bit. Like, we obviously Apple's devices have always been expensive, but now we really have like a solid 3-month period after launch where a device comes out in the first month it's completely MSRP, but obviously you can still get it maybe with a discount if you're a student, or if let's say stores like Walmart have like partnership program, like memberships programs where you pay something throughout the year, but then you get devices at discount, or like you get them basically first, which also holds its own value, of course. And then beyond that, Apple does have, of course, things like their back to school program, which occasionally adds value that is a little less predictable. And then once that first month or so runs out, this is when websites like Amazon come in and usually give you like a solid $100 discount regardless of the price of the device. Once you get closer to $2,000, the discount gets closer to like $150, and then by the third month, I would say that discount is very likely to turn closer to $200. Of course, unless there is like some kind of shortage going on. So it might happen a little later with iPhones, for example, while there's still like in hot demand during the holiday season. Some Macs might be more in demand than others. Like I would argue that the MacBook Pros, even though they have consistently gone in price pretty quickly, the MacBook Airs, just because like some people are not as sold on things like the screen, I would say percentage-wise, they actually lose some price very quickly. So regardless, what I'm saying is, even though the MacBook Pro will be more expensive, especially on an MSRP basis, you can get it cheaper, but the same goes for Snapdragon X Elite. I'm not saying you need the premium upcharge of the Surface laptop to achieve the performance levels that we'll see from the X Elite. Now, will it be better? Most likely than like the trashy VivoBook S15 with the lowest end? Yeah, but that's why you can get 1 terabyte of storage in a $1,300 device, while the MacBook Pro gives you at $2,000 still only 512 gigabytes. In fact, even if you move up to the 16-inch MacBook Pro at $2,500 base price, this is where you still are stuck with 512 gigabytes of base storage, something that I've been very critical of in the past. So don't think that I'm excusing everything here. I absolutely understand there are things that Apple needs to change in order to deliver better value. I've also made arguments in the past how that can be achieved without significantly hurting Apple's margins. And we do have a few more people right now, so I will be getting started. But before I fully get into it, I do want to remind you guys again, please make this a lively chat. Let me know what you agree with, what you disagree with. It helps me be my best streamer. I hope it helps me give the best stream to you. And yeah, and this is a slightly longer video, so I will be looking into if I should speed it up as we watch. But I do believe that it might not be necessary. Those guys usually speak pretty quickly, and I'm probably not going to pause it quite as much as I did the previous videos when basically every piece of information was brand new. And as always, when I start a video, let me know if the audio mixing between my sound and theirs is working all right for you.
Comparing it to the M3 Pro, just like you guys asked. And not only are we going to compare the actual laptops, the displays, speakers, everything about Laptop 7 with the X4, and we are delivering. This is the Surface Laptop 7 with the X Elite that beat out the M3 in a lot of tasks. So we are comparing it to the M3 Pro, just like you guys asked. And not only are we going to compare the actual laptops, the displays,
SSD,
speakers, everything about them, but we're going to
it's
do
a full-on
lot of
device
performance
comparison.
tests, both benchmarks and real-world
I
tests.
should probably
and
put that in the
both
title
these are
later
at
on.
100% battery life, so we are going to compare that as well. So now let's go ahead and unplug both of them. And I have to say, I love that we have that Surface connector for charging. It's magnetic, just like MagSafe. And of course, you could still use the USB-C on both of them. Now, here are the full specs of each laptop, and you can see how great of a value this Surface.
Okay, so the Surface starts at 512 gigabytes here. The Mac gives you more memory, but yeah, I wouldn't put too much value into that. This is also PCIe 4 speed memory versus PCIe 3 speed memory, if we evaluate based on 4 lanes. This memory is also on a faster bus. However, that isn't the 7500 mega transfers per second RAM that you find in the M4. It's 6400 mega transfers, so this comes to slightly higher memory bandwidth, but not like, it's basically 130 something versus around 150. Not too much of a difference. Now, this is the bint GPU or the underclocked GPU, however you want to treat it. So you can get it up to 4.6 teraflops, however, not in the Surface laptop, which is so weird, which I really don't get why you couldn't, like, the second, like, maybe somebody wants like 32 gigs of RAM, why you wouldn't offer that to people with like, with like the higher end version and just charge maybe $50 more. I have no idea. Now, this is the Bint M3 Pro, so it's 14 GPU cores versus a full 18, and it's 5P cores, 6E cores versus a full 6+6 layout, while this is always basically 12P cores. If you want fewer cores from Qualcomm right now, you would have to go with the Snapdragon X Plus processor, but then you really are in a bad place trying to compete against Apple. This is a 3 nanometer chip based on N3B. It clocks up to 4.05 gigahertz, so actually pretty similar clock speeds. Now, I know the X Elite can give you 4.2 or even 4.3 gigahertz. It's like a dual core boost. So the IPC, given that we know that this wins single core performance, definitely is in favor of the M3 Pro. Now, obviously, Apple does have a chip in the M4 that clocks up to 4.4 gigahertz based on TSMC's N3E node, and obviously a new architecture that is based on ARM v9. So it will be interesting to see how this scales, like multi-threading versus M3. This won against the M3 in Cinebench when it comes to multi-threading by like 50-60%. Obviously, this has 25% more CPU core and more performance cores. It has 50% more E-cores. So that should compensate for that a little bit, though I wouldn't expect this to win. I would expect the full 6+6 version to win. And again, of course, the M4 exists. The M4 already like reaches quite a lot of the heights of the X Elite at like less than half the power consumption often. So those are kind of my expectations. This is not a video I pre-watched. Let's see. Of course, I could talk about the device where this is a mini LED panel on this side, while this is an LCD panel. Both are 120 hertz, but this one will give you 600 nits of SDR brightness and 1600 nits of HDR brightness. And of course, with an app like Vivid, you can even make this have 1000 nits of SDR brightness, an app that I have that you can even download on the App Store. Of course, the speakers here will demolish this. The amount of ports, given that you get like HDMI 2.1, you get an SD card reader up to 300 megabits per second, you get like 3 Thunderbolt ports because this is the M3 Pro, not the M3 MacBook Pro. Yeah, this will be quite one-sided in many ways, but it kind of should be given the price difference. But I do believe that in some ways it will more than justify the price difference when it comes to raw performance. And I say that because I've talked with Vadim yesterday on Twitter, and he alluded to 1 or 2 benchmarks that they will be presenting today. So let's go.
Surface Laptop 7 is matching up the specs. Now, the MacBook is $2,000, but you can pick it up right now on Amazon for $16,900.
Yeah, you can really feel the fact that this has been like on the market for now quite a while, which is phenomenal, because now this is why I say the biggest problem of the X Elite is its launch window, where it's like launching 9 months after its original presentation, where it's launching after the introduction of the M3, the M3 Pro, the M3 Max, and now even after the launch of the M4. This is phenomenal. This is a 15% price reduction, which I often say this is kind of the price it probably needed to be right from the get-go to sell like hotcakes. And this pricing is also partially why I believe that Apple has not yet introduced M4, M4 Pro, M4 Max MacBook Pros, because they need to sell out of those devices. Otherwise, they would need to like sell them as like refurbished or whatever at some point, or through the distribution chain sell them for like below 15 or 1400, which they obviously don't want to. So yeah, that's quite amazing. The only complaint I have about deals like that is usually that the 1 terabyte models are not as deeply discounted. Certainly not percentage wise, and then the chip, you cannot really like as freely choose the exact chip and like RAM configuration that you could on Apple's website. It's basically whatever they have in logistics, that's what you can buy, which is usually the base model and one other variant, which in this case it looks like it's M3 Pro 512 and 1 terabyte.
$99. We'll link it down below. That is a killer value.
Yeah. This destroys the X Elite. This is like, if we really compare right now like 1700 versus 1400 on the X Elite, given just how much better, and I listed a lot of the potential advantages already, the MacBook Pro will be in so many ways. Yeah, this won't be too kind.
We'll see how they compare in the real world. Now, in terms of the quality and the design, both are made out of solid, really nice aluminum. This Surface laptop is really good. Size-wise, they are very similar. And as far as thickness, at the rear portion of the Surface, it's slightly thicker, but because of its wedge shape, just like the old school MacBooks, it's thinner.
Yeah, but I've always found one issue with the wedge design of the Surface laptops. It's not like a complaint. And I don't like that it doesn't wedge enough, right? You know how the MacBook Air like used to become almost sharp at the end, where it's like tethered down to like a few millimeters of thickness at most. And this just looks like it gets like 10-15% thinner than at the thickest point, which doesn't really help with much with keyboard ergonomics or anything. I almost wish they just followed the Apple example here and made it completely like flat, basically a brick, and better utilized internal space. I don't know. It's just, this is a weird decision where it doesn't quite wedge as much as you want it to wedge, but it's also like not quite as space efficient as you would want it to be, because obviously now you have complexities like obviously batteries, unless you go with Apple's terraced battery design that they used to have for the super thin 12-inch MacBook, which I doubt, not even Apple uses it anymore. This is where you get like really, really like weird questions of like, is it wedged because the MacBook Air was wedged, which was wedged because, and I know that wedged is not the correct word here, because like the Sony Vaio laptops of the day were wedged, but you kind of needed that because the Vaio laptops were so incredibly thick at their thickest point that they needed, in order to look even remotely attractive, to taper out to a thinner point. And I just wonder, like, how much utility do you really get these days from like a 15% thinning on one side?
At the front, the Surface is lighter at 3 pounds compared to 3.5.
Which is actually very interesting here, because I do want to briefly look up Surface Laptop 7 battery size. Now, I would actually have to say I am positively surprised by the weight of the base M3 Pro MacBook Pro, because obviously that still means over like the M3 version, it is a dual fan design. It's a full 72 watt hours, which isn't a big difference versus 70 watt hours, but it's even something. This is a 54 watt hour design. This is LCD. This is mini LED. Like the speakers here are much better. I just wonder why it's so close in weight. And I could ask Apple maybe the same thing, and for like their cheaper versions, and even why the MacBook Air is relatively heavy. And the argument is probably that a lot of the weight is just like high quality, relatively thick aluminum for the chassis, right? If you go down to something like the Asus VivoBook, which like flexes very easy under like your palm, this is where you get like a big discrepancy in build quality. And yeah, the idea that this is so close in weight, despite obviously being weaker in so many areas, does suggest to me that like the base weight is pretty impressive here overall. And also, of course, you do still need quite a bit of cooling for the X Elite. So even though it technically will have a far lower performing core chip in many ways, it still needs at least the cooling of the MacBook Pro.
Both of these do have fans built in, and as far as the ports, the Surface has a USB Type A port, which is nice.
Nope, it's not nice. It's holding back the industry. It's slow. It's a standard that isn't getting upgraded anymore. If you put in a USB port 20 years from now in a device, it will still be at max like the best USB-A port you get today. If you put in USB-C, now granted USB-C might also get superseded by something else at a point in time, but at least it would be Thunderbolt 5, probably something like Thunderbolt 6. Hell, if Intel finally gets off their asses, it might be Thunderbolt 7. And to me, it just seems weird to like almost like you can almost like say like the wedge design exists so they can shove in a USB-A port, which nobody really should want at this point. It's like, get yourself one adapter. Like you probably would need one anyway for like HDMI or whatever. Get yourself like a small dongle that gives you like HDMI, SD card slots, and like a USB-A, maybe Ethernet, right? Like this, those are premium devices. You can pair them with $70 accessories, in my opinion, and then you can reuse that accessory basically in perpetuity, right? Unless you really then at some point want like a dongle that supports HDMI 2.1, which are for some reason still somewhat difficult to come by, which I assume has to do with the disparity of like HDMI 2.1 being technically 48 gigabyte per second and Thunderbolt being 40 in one direction, but that's neither here nor there. And so that's basically my complaint here. USB-A is not good.
Dual USB-Cs on the left-hand side.
Those are all USB 4s, by the way. Those are not Thunderbolts. That does mean that they can theoretically have the same output as Thunderbolt. Even though I haven't seen it tested, it doesn't mean actually that it has to reach a full 40. But it might not work with every Thunderbolt accessory you would want.
But the MacBook does have Thunderbolt, so it has a little bit more capability.
That's my mic works. I hate it like that I cannot just see it in front of me. Maybe I'll just should switch it around in that holding mechanism so I can see it more easily.
Capabilities like daisy chaining and having better dock support, but the Surface does have fast USB 4. But the MacBook does have some extras on the right hand side. We have a fast HDMI, we have another Thunderbolt, and an SD card.
Doesn't the window, like the Microsoft connector, like have some PCIe lanes or something? Doesn't it allow you to like connect to like an extra dock? It's just that nobody uses it, and it's really a standard that they should at this point give up on in order to maybe just give you more ports and turn this just into a standard charging connector.
Reader, which is so nice to have built in. Now, as far as the keyboards, both of these are really nice. The Magic keyboards are great. The Surface also feels great. It has a nice tactile.
I've always said that I do believe that the Surface keyboard is one of the nicest in the industry. I do believe that it's actually like clickier than Apple's. Probably because it just has a little bit more travel, but also the actual mechanism is very, very satisfying. I like the sound of Apple's keyboards a little more, but overall, yeah, the keyboards are a draw.
Feel, but I prefer the slightly concave keys. Both are excellent though.
Yeah,
and in terms of the trackpads, the Mac has a slightly larger one.
Which is also weird because look at this. Like this thing could like extend slightly more towards there. But not to say that it's bad given its size limitation. There's some asymmetry here that drives me mad, which we'll also see throughout some other parts of the device. But it is definitely a pretty trackpad, and it is a very advanced one, especially by Windows standards.
But the Surface is also magnetic, so it's not a diving board design, and this is the best trackpad on any Windows laptop. It is excellent. Now on the Mac, you can see speaker grills on the left and right side of the keyboard, whereas they are hidden on the Surface. Now the Surface beat out the 13-inch MacBook Air in terms of speakers, so
not really. I don't agree with that, but okay. Was it like louder? I don't even fully remember.
let's go ahead and compare it to the 14-inch that has a 6-speaker system.
I don't know if the Mac is louder. It just feels like it's like this feels like this was taken with a microphone that's basically on top of this, which it is. This feels like the entire Surface was like given, and not the Surface laptop, like the entire surface of the table was basically like booming. Yeah, it is extremely room feeling. This feels like also, like, how did this win against the MacBook Air? What's he saying? Because it was louder? Because it feels high-pitched and not very well balanced. It basically gets bass completely wrong. Yeah, this is actual bass that like, and I know that like the smaller MacBook Air won't do like too well in bass stuff. This is where the 15-inch MacBook Air more comes in, but yeah, I don't get how the MacBook could lose here. Also, like, you can already see some differences here with like light reflectivity. Now I am happy this is a glossy screen because glossy screens all the way, but like the infinitely low reflectivity here, and of course I always say true blacks because of mini LED. This isn't it, by the way. This is just from the better coating. With how this image works, it has basically very little to no chance to truly utilize mini LED. So the better contrast you see here really comes from the coating of the screen. It does not come from the mini LED. That's more like, it will show up maybe here where there's a larger black area, but like even here, once you go close to the human, no chance basically.
All right, you guys heard that for yourselves. The Mac in the 14-inch size is amazing. It's full, it's rich, and the bass hits so deep because of dedicated woofers. So if you're willing to spend a little bit more money on the 14-inch Pro Max, I mean, they are amazing. Now, as far as webcams, this is the 1080p webcam on the 14-inch Mac.
And I will speculate that the Surface actually slightly wins here. I have said that for a few years, Microsoft has had the slightly better laptop cameras.
MacBook Pro, along with their studio quality microphones like Apple likes to name them. And this is the 1080p.
Okay, I'll take it back. This is garbage. Complete and utter trash, and the microphone is noticeably worse.
Webcam on the Surface Laptop 7, the first thing that stands out is that it does give you a wider image. And I also can see dual microphones right on top of that screen. So you guys let me know which one looks better and which one sounds better.
I'll have to say, like in the beginning when he started speaking, the microphone picked up some noise. But yeah, in the end, it sounded pretty clean. So the microphones are not as garbage as the camera here. But I'm surprised to see the camera be in this state. I guess I didn't pay much attention to how like the Surface Laptop 5 and 6 were performing. I know that in general, like obviously the Surface Pros have decent cameras because obviously they have much more thickness to work with. But yeah, it seems like almost Microsoft regressed on laptop cameras, or it just looks that way because Apple made theirs so much better. But I've been working with a 1080p Apple laptop camera for 3.5 years. So, and even at that point, I would have probably said that the Surfaces had like better cameras. I don't know what happened.
Better down in the comment section below. Now the MacBook has Touch ID to log in, whereas the Surface has Windows Hello. Right there, it sees me, it logs me in, and even though the lid thickness is the same, Microsoft managed to put Windows Hello into this.
Windows Hello does not compare to the complexity of Face ID, so don't come at me with, oh, the lid thickness is the same. Even though I technically don't see that much technical issue with Apple putting in, well, unless of course the aluminum back cover is pretty thick, so maybe I should watch like a proper breakdown of this. So yeah, I'm not quite sure if Face ID is possible. It's definitely not quite impossible, but its feasibility is in question.
But Apple, with a notch, did not. There's no...
Yeah, the notch is for the camera, for symmetrical bezels. Like you can see here, right, that the bezels going around the actual screen are all uniform. Now you do have this small extension that is for basically the, right where the hinge is. That's also partially where a lot of the heat from the fan will come out to, so you don't want it to just hit the laptop. But once you go to the Surface here, you'll find that...
Now as far as the bezels, nice all around. Yeah. Of course, we don't have that notch.
Of course, yeah. So here you have one bezel size here, and then you have, of course, your thin side bezels, but then you really do have that. It's not like you can see the Mac also has a chin. My comparison is not with the chin. My comparison is that on the Mac, the chin is a noticeably different part, and it sometimes it goes away depending on how far you move the hinge, right? While here, it's just one continuous material. It's
here, and comparing the displays, the MacBook does have more resolution. It's a little bit higher, but you can't really tell looking at them. Both look nice.
they're all around like wait, what is the resolution of the Surface Laptop 7? 2304 by 1536. Okay.
but you can't really tell looking at them. Both look nice and sharp, and the MacBook does have Pro Motion, and the Surface also has their own version. It goes up to 120 Hertz. It could drop down to as low as 24 Hertz to save battery power. So both are very nice. Now, one thing
That's part of Pro Motion, by the way. The fact that this is always an argument I hear about 120 Hertz on their laptop, on their cheaper iPhones, the non-Pro iPhones, which is well, can you put Pro Motion in there? Well, technically you don't, because Pro Motion does not just refer to 120 Hertz. It also refers to variable refresh rate, which for Apple is at least between 24 and 120 Hertz. Sometimes it means 10 to 120 Hertz. On the latest iPhones, it means 1 to 120 Hertz. And the idea basically is, 1 to 120 Hertz, 1 is what you need for always on display, at least according to Apple. 10 to 120 Hertz is kind of what you need to at every given moment while scrolling on a phone, right? It will adapt your refresh rate. It will go down to the lowest it can when you have a still image on there or something like that. Then for 24 Hertz movies, it will go to 24 FPS movies, it will go to 48 Hertz, things like that basically. And then of course on the laptops, they cannot get quite as low, 1 or even 10 Hertz, but they do definitely do those tricks with as I said, for movies, things like that.
That the Mac doesn't is a touchscreen.
Yeah, and that touch layer is part of what makes the coating so bad. This is why laptops that forgo that touch layer have so much better contrast, which you can see slightly off axis. Do you perceive anything as truly black here?
Display. So if you like to interact with touch, only the...
Nope, I don't. Not on a laptop. Again, this goes back to Steve Jobs' quote, and it gives great demo, which is exactly what he's doing, right? He's overextending his arm. His arm is now disconnected from the other input method here, the keyboard. You can see that just the aspect ratio of the screen alone at which would be around 3:2 here, is all 16:10. Usually surfaces are 3:2, but this kind of looks more 16:10. I don't know why. Maybe it just looks that way next to the Mac with its notch. But yeah, and what I'm saying about the aspect ratio, it's just so you have to now move your finger, right? If you're closing the here, and let's say your Windows thingy was at the down left portion, right in the corner. Now you have to move all the way here with that overextended arm, right? And now again, how do you connect easily to the trackpad? Do you use both hands? And again, this is the thing that I do with my iPad while walking around, and I hold it in two hands, right? It even splits the keyboard if I want, but or nowadays it makes it smaller so I can swipe on one side. I like that split keyboard. I don't even know if it's still in DOS, but yeah, this I never understood. Tipo Master, we're going to have our arms disconnected from the other input methods with touchscreen OLED Max in 2026. Yeah, bro, for tandem OLED, it's just brainwave connectivity at that point. No keyboards, no trackpads, no arms whatsoever. It's just brain waves.
Surface can do that.
Like that one girl that plays Elden Ring with an EEG, which is so obviously fake, but regardless. Yeah, so stuff like that.
Now, both these displays are rated at 600
thank you for joining,
nits native, but when you're watching HDR footage, the MacBook can go up to 1600. So looking back at this 4K HDR video, the highlights pop a lot more in some of these scenes.
Again, it's not just the popping more. The contrast through Mini LED is genuinely better. Right? This is not just that it gets brighter in certain areas. The fact that it gets dimmer in certain areas is just as important.
than what you get on the Surface. Now, I'm also seeing much better contrast as well because the Mac has a mini LED display with
and it's not just that. I've talked about, now granted, they are testing this now in a darker environment, so you can see the better coding a little less, but you could see it before that. Especially with the touch layer, people underestimate what the touch layer does to screens. It makes them worse. That's not bad, obviously, on a tablet, on a smartphone. It's a worthwhile compromise if your main input method is touch. But on here, I just don't see why. You can save money. You can give us a better screen experience.
Bunch of zones where the backlighting could be turned off, giving us nice deep blacks, and compared to the Surface where the blacks look a little bit gray, even though it has really good
anti-reflective. I always worry about my microphone. I should maybe change its color, because on the sides it reflects like a very warm light source that I have above me, and it looks slightly reddish to my eyes. But in the middle, it's obviously completely blue, but the middle is non-visible when I look at like just from the corner of my eye. So I made up doing this, which looks ridiculous on stream, and now I made it more ridiculous by calling attention to it.
Now, if you're watching something at night, particularly if you have a lot of contrast there, the difference is massive. The MacBook's highlights still pop like crazy, but you get those deep blacks, whereas with the LCD screen on the Surface, all the blacks look gray. You don't have...
And this is where OLED comes in on even a product like the VivoBook S15. It's just like... I don't know if you guys like read the news about like tandem OLED going mass market, because LG is now producing it for like the latest Dell XPS. And it's tandem OLED, which is the OLED that Apple uses for the iPad Pro, but where the iPad Pro gives you a 120 Hertz ProMotion from 10 to 120 Hertz. It gives you 1000 nits of SDR brightness in a 5.1 millimeter thick tablet, and it gives you up to 600 nits of peak HDR brightness. That tandem OLED on the LG is a 3K, so that's good, 60 Hertz panel, which is already weird because all those other panels are 120 Hertz. Even the non-Samsung OLED panels out there, that like the LG panels that are non-tandem OLED, already are 90 or 120 Hertz, but somehow tandem OLED is 60 Hertz. And then you get 400 nits of SDR brightness and 500 nits of true HDR black, which is the VESA specification for OLED screens, which Apple doesn't care about. Apple treats mini LED and OLED the same when it comes to XDR, at least. And it just was so baffling to me. Like, why is tandem OLED on a laptop now so much worse than it is on the iPad? To the point where if you saw just the raw specs of it, you wouldn't even think that it's tandem OLED. So, yeah, and obviously the other OLEDs that we have are not that, which means while the risk of burn-in has reduced or has like gone down over the last few years, it is still somewhat there. And obviously in an operating system like Windows, where you have a lot of like fixed in place like UI elements, that's not great to have basically any risk of OLED burn-in. So yeah, while I am a big fan of OLED in many ways, I've always said, by the way, that I do prefer the color reproduction of just a nicely tuned LCD or mini LED panel, but I do understand that OLED has its advantages. This is why I'm a big advocate for at some point for the industry to shift to micro LED, which should give us all the advantages of all the previous technologies basically together. But yeah, right now I would most definitely choose mini LED on the MacBook Pro, like over like any kind of OLED out there. Like, I'm not a pro gamer. I don't care about the response time of OLED on my screen. What I do care about is just having a nice bright display, very reproducible results, basically without the risk of burn-in. And then in a few years, I would love to get basically the iPad Pro stats at 1000 SDR brightness, 1600 nits of HDR brightness in this kind of panel. I wish it would be coming sooner. And when I saw the Dell XPS news, I was like, wait, what? Why didn't Apple secure like those like laptop size tandem OLED orders? And then I saw them and I'm like, oh, they're probably using entirely different machinery for that, or completely different quality panels. It might be like a complete niche order just for Dell, so that Dell can claim they have something that matches Apple's. And guys, we've been streaming now for 45 minutes. We have quite a couple of people watching. I do want to remind you to please subscribe. It helps out your videos tremendously. Leave a like. Which always attracts new people because it is liked by the algorithm. Comment as Tipo Master did, because commenting makes me a better live chatter, so I can interact with you guys, find out what you like, what you don't like. Share the video to anybody who you think might enjoy it. And of course, if you catch me live, like right now, you can leave a super chat or a super sticker to support this channel directly with a small donation, or you can subscribe to my Patreon. Link is in the description of this channel.
The same super bright highlights, so the experience doesn't really even compare. The MacBook's display is so nice, but the only downside is if you're looking off axis or
yeah, but like you get that downside for like all the upsides, right? Like on the that bloom that you see around the text, that is the entire screen of the Surface. Right, so while yes, this seems like it's like a stark difference to the rest of the screen, because it is, because the rest of the screen is true black, on the Surface everything is that grayish halo around it.
with crazy high contrast, you do notice some blooming. Now, it's also crazy to see the difference in anti-reflectivity coatings. The Surface is a lot more reflective,
And part of that is the touch layer. It always is.
even though it beat out the regular M3 MacBook Air. The 14-inch MacBook Pro has really good anti-reflectivity coatings, so that's going to be great for using it outdoors. And of course, you can get the app that kicks up the brightness even more.
Vivid.
And I want to remind you
wonder
guys
how,
that we do have a big price
fast
difference
it's
here,
transcoding
but
video from DaVinci. Well, we will see some video production workflows. And I apologize, I cannot pronounce your name. It's in letters that I unfortunately cannot read.
if you don't need the M3 Pro, for $1,400, you can get the regular M3 in this machine and have this amazing display. And now, as we get into performance, I want to give you an update on the battery life before we
It's funny though that they didn't really talk about that price, like $1,400 instead of $1,600 for the M3 MacBook Pro, or just how like they talked about how dirt cheap the MacBook Air can get, but like it really doesn't look too great for like the Surface, given the like the price discounts. And the question is like, well, what about when the Surface or like other X Elite devices get similar discounts? Well, don't forget that at that point we will hit M4 Pro and Max MacBook Pros, and at that point you could still buy at that point now a refurbished M3 version, or one that like it's just extremely discounted by 25% or something like that, maybe in some clearance thing or whatever. So, because this will always be its true competitor. Just because M4 Pro MacBook Pros come out while the X Elite is still like fresh on the market, doesn't mean that now the M4 is its real competitor. This was always its real competitor. It's just that timing-wise, Qualcomm was so late that they will now also have to compete with the M4s, which is quite bad for them. Tipo Master saying Apple's probably waiting for when the touch layer doesn't impact visuals at all with Insult Touch with their tandem OLED Max. Nope, there will not be a touch layer on OLED Max either. Like, unless, like, you have to understand the touch discussion has, like, yes, it has to do with stuff like visual impact through like the touch layer. The issue with that is, though, you have to consider, why would they put it in? Why waste even a single penny on it, or a few dollars to be more precise, on something that is so fundamentally unnecessary, given that they've invested decades of research and development and good money into putting high quality keyboard and trackpads there, right? They've tried to make the laptop lid relatively thin, right? And they will make it even thinner with OLED, so why add any extra thickness for the touch layer? Like, you see those things where you're like, oh, but like touch can do like things like drawing for you. Do you really want to like draw on a traditional laptop without the 360-degree hinge? What about the 16-inch MacBook Pro, right? Apple does not give the 14-inch MacBook Pro exclusive features that the 16-inch doesn't have, because the 14-inch is small enough, so maybe it still makes sense in like a 360 hinge way. The 16-inch absolutely doesn't, not from its weight. No, like, it would just constantly be dropping to the floor for people while they try to flex it and to unflex it, and then people will complain that it falls down, that it breaks. It adds obviously even more cost if you do it on a larger screen. It adds even more cost if you make it ready for like an Apple Pencil style device, right? So it actually is extremely high refresh, like in terms of responsiveness and things like that. It just, to me, do you know, both quote or agree with touchscreen Macs? No, they don't. They you have to understand, we've talked about this time and time again. Apple has prototypes for pretty much everything. You're saying that with iPhone mirroring and iPad apps, it becomes increasingly useful. Brother, we've had iPad apps on the Mac for 3.5 years. We've had a full redesign for the MacBook Pro 2.5 years ago. That's the Mac that I have in front of me. Apple did not do that. iPhone mirroring is a nice convenience feature that Apple went out of their way to make compatible with their large trackpads. Like, this thing, and heed my words, when it comes, unless Apple redesigns the actual form factor of the Mac, which, as I said, if they give it like a 360 hinge or something crazy like that, or something like that Surface Studio laptop had or something like that, right? Maybe they could do that, and then a touchscreen could make sense. But if we just stick with the traditional clamshell, with the normal hinge, they will not do so. And before you come at me with Quo and Gurman, those are also the guys that believed in ultra iPhones or iPhones with Apple Pencil support. And not too long ago, they believed in wireless, completely wireless iPhones that didn't replace Lightning in favor of USB-C, but went completely portless. And you know what those guys were about those things? Maybe correct. I'm not even actually going to shit on them, because I think that maybe in the lab, Apple was testing out those things. The same way that we now are discussing, I believe Mark Gurman talked about like Vision Pro with or like a Vision Air, but maybe with a narrower field of view, and people were like, oh my god, how dare Apple make the field of vision even smaller? And I'm like, bro, it's a prototype device. They're prototyping out different ways to make it cheaper, and this is just one of them. Do we 100% know that this one will pass validation? No, we don't. And this is what I always try to tell people when it comes to stuff that is 3 or 4 years in advance, which is where actually a lot of those rumors originated, if you remember. The touchscreen Mac rumors are like very old at this point, and we haven't heard much about that in like the last year or anything. Like Ross Young never said that tandem OLED is coming to the MacBooks together with touchscreens in any recent like report or anything. This is what I'm trying to tell you to be careful about, because there's a lot of excitement in like prototype leaks that really like did like remember the 1000 no's for every yes thing, right? In prototype phase, it's not like Apple doesn't know that most of those things will not come true, but they still let their engineers test it because it's important. It lets them create maybe something fun in an experiment and things like that. Mike saying, I have smudges on my display and no one has mastered smudge-free self-cleaning screens. Exactly, and I spit on my screen because I talk in front of it for 2.5 hours during my live streams. Can you imagine the unbelievable smooch and dreck that it would accumulate if I also used it as a touchscreen? That's disgusting, man.
Start hitting it hard. The MacBook is at 94% while we were doing all that shooting, whereas the Surface is already at 89%. So it is a little bit lower, but now we're gonna start pushing them and we'll see what happens. And now let's go ahead and compare the performance of the SSDs. Like I mentioned, both of these.
I still need somebody with a lot of like expertise in maybe even those specific applications to tell us what those numbers mean, because we do have like these numbers that are bad on the Mac, but they don't really affect anything in real world from what I have seen. Like in terms of like random access speeds, basically, not random access as in RAM, but you know, like random reads and writes on storage, I haven't seen Macs really crash that badly. Maybe this works, like maybe this specific test ignores like any kind of like cache those things have, but yeah, but yeah, obviously the continued, the sequential reads and writes are just a lot faster here. And this is the 512 gigabyte version. It goes a little faster, especially for the writes on the 1 terabytes.
The MacBook Pro with the M3 Pro is so fast. We have 64% difference in terms of performance, almost 6,000 here. Now the Surface is not bad, and in the write speeds, we have 4,600 compared to 2,500. That is an 84% difference. So the SSDs are clearly faster with this Mac. And now I have Geekbench 6 opened up. You guys see we have 18 gigs compared to 16, and we have a big difference in core counts. We have a 12 core compared to an 11 core because this M3 Pro is the binned version.
Wait, 3.7 gigahertz? Is that a bug? Because it's not 3.7 gigahertz.
Only 5 of those are performance cores with 6 efficiency, whereas on the X Elite, all 12 are actually performance cores.
Yeah, I've heard some people say it has like a 4-core efficiency cluster because they are clocked so much slower, but the Mac like has efficiency cores that are just architecturally completely incapable of clocking much higher. The reason why Qualcomm does the things it does is mainly for like balanced efficiency and not having to design actually good E-cores from the ground up. So they instead take good P-cores and just clock them down a lot. Which puts them architecturally really behind what everybody else is doing. Like AMD probably comes closest with Zen 5C, and then Intel and Apple have like completely like custom designs for their E-cores that are supposed to, like Apple's already are the world's most advanced efficiency cores, and Intel is promising a big improvement for Lunar Lake efficiency cores. So
cores, and we have higher frequencies.
Okay, so now we
let's
see
hit run on both of these, and I want to point out that the X Elite in the Surface Laptop 7 is an 80 SKU, which is not the highest, but out of all of the X Elite laptops we tested, it is actually the fastest on battery power. So props to Microsoft for giving us good performance whether we're plugged in or unplugged compared to other manufacturers that will limit it. And we do have this set to the best performance because that's what we're doing. All right, and here are the results, and it is so close. Even though this is the 80 SKU, it beat out the M3 Pro in more.
This is a slightly low result. You usually get close to 3100. Now it's still faster than the X Elite. And then when it comes to multi-core performance, this one doesn't scale that well even on the 84 SKU or whatever. But yeah, this one could probably get you like 2850 or maybe something like that on the higher clocking SKU. So nice work from that here. The unfortunate part is we don't get any power consumption metrics. Now I know Geekbench is not great for power consumption metrics in general. It's not a long test, but it would have definitely been nice to see.
Multi-core, we have just under 14,000 compared to 14,263. And if we look at the single core, the Mac is faster by about...
But we had to draw the Surface laptop as being faster. You see that, guys? Okay, that's funny. Like, I assume this is like a mistake because they covered up the 2, so it would have been probably like here, but that's
200
funny.
points, it's about a 6% difference, but the performance you're getting for the money with the Surface Laptop 7...
I mean, not really. If you compare this at 1400 versus 1700, you get a little bit more RAM, you get way faster storage, so things that are already might be dependent on things like swap or like more memory and more memory bandwidth, those things are already better. You get, of course, all those other advantages we've even talked about already, like the screen, like the speakers, like the camera, like the ports. And obviously, we've already seen that this outperforms it in battery life in general, and it will probably be the case even after high-intensity tasks. I'm not actually sure that anything that you have told us right now points to this being great value. It's cheaper, but being cheaper does not make your value automatically go up.
On battery power is excellent. And I have Speedometer 3.0 opened up here, both using Chrome, and this is going to give us an image of just how quick and snappy
both using
the web
Chrome?
browsing performance is. And look at that, we have 37.7 compared to 28.4.
Okay, I still would use Safari because Safari is more efficient. I know Safari can be sometimes like 5% slower here, but it just gives you a lot better efficiency. And yeah, that coding, man, you will actually like this screen is I don't actually know the tech spec for like the Surface laptop. This is the Surface Pro 7. Where's the Surface laptop? Surface laptop 7. 7th edition, they call it. Okay, that's funny. And now I would like to see its tech specs. Okay, no, that's for replacement. Okay, Microsoft products. More. Wait, what? The products and devices are separate on Microsoft website. That's good to know. So Surface laptop, screen. What? Why is it all? Oh my God. Jesus. I don't want to misquote the peak brightness of the Surface Laptop 7. And I don't know why, but for some reason it just redirected me directly to like Microsoft support website instead of like Google. It has been worse and worse in recent years, unfortunately. So Surface Laptop Studio, what the? Oh yeah, they still have that, but they didn't upgrade it. And then tech specs, show all specs. And then when we go to the screen, it has a peak brightness rating of 600 nits. Nice. So it's just that coating that makes it look so much worse. That's actually pretty bad because now you're literally wasting like power and things like that you otherwise would have available. You start page search engine. I'm using it on my iPad. My iPad is always next to me. This is why you don't see what I'm searching for. I apologize. I just don't like having to switch between a ton of windows. I know it's like visually a little bit confusing for people. Like usually if I do a more complex search, like I want to show you like a full news site, I'll do that on my laptop. But whenever I want like one signal result, I usually do it just like that. And yeah, I could have, I guess I maybe even looked up from like spotlight search and just then like went to a web search, but it's just Google, man. In general, Google is giving out weird results in recent times.
28.4 is very fast, but we have a difference of 33% in favor of the M3 Pro. And now I have the Figma app opened up here for web design. We'll see how it compares. This project right here is brought to us by 500 Designs, one of the best design studios in California. And I'm gonna just start out by testing out the smoothness.
I assume they are both
right
just
over here. We
like
have these high resolution images.
Smooth there,
And
because the
that
base
is
M3 was
loaded up
smooth.
very
It seems to
quick,
be
very
mostly like a
snappy. Let's
single
try
core
another
task.
one. Right over here.
Yeah, it's
So we have a couple seconds
it's
here,
weird that
bam,
they're
it
testing
loaded
something
up.
that obviously
Now, let's
doesn't
try it
max
on
out
the
either
Surface,
chip.
And this is a touch screen.
So
here I can select. Let me just zoom in.
I mean, you
this
can
way. I'm
select
gonna go
stuff
to the
with your
same exact
trackpad. What do you
spot.
mean?
Right here, that loaded up super quick, and the little image lower is higher resolution. So let's zoom in here. Wow, so that loaded up even quicker than it did on the Mac. And now I have 12 high resolution layers selected here. We're gonna export all of these and see how quick it is. All right, guys, we are done. And I wanna mention that Figma is actually native for ARM, so it is not being emulated. So we are getting full performance. The Mac took 1:20, whereas the X Elite Surface took 1:51. So the Surface took 38% longer than our
It
M3
seemed like
Pro
it was
MacBook.
using some GPU, which is what I always thought it did. The Verge just dropped a Surface Laptop 7 review. Is it a video or is it an article? Let me just briefly go to YouTube, The Verge. New chips, new screens, new gadgets, The Verge cast. So it's an article, right? I'll guess I might look into that as we continue.
And now let's take a look at graphics performance. Once again, this is the binned M3 Pro, and I have 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme Unlimited opened up. We are going to...
And I will say that in every video, because there are always new people watching, 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme Unlimited is an old, outdated test that says nothing about modern games. It is... better than GFX Bench, but then worse than basically everything else. Somehow saying the absolute most frustrating thing about so many of these reviews is they're based on nothing more than feel, no objective data, no numbers, it just feels. Well, what was his name? You know, like the old review guy, Walt Mossberg, who's like legendary in the industry. He actually made a name for himself by focusing on like, how does it feel, right? He was really trying to bring the end user experience into the forefront of a tech review discussion. My issue here is sometimes you can overanalyze certain things, right? I would say that when, for example, for like speaker analysis, I like what Max Tech is doing here, because you can try to go to like Linus Tech Tips and read like their scientific analysis of the speakers. And then it might not have that much to do with like how you perceive, because maybe one is is like bottom firing speakers versus like top firing speakers. Do you remember Walt Moss puppet? That guy had the Steve Jobs puppet too. Miss that era. Wait, what? There was a guy who made a puppet of Walt Mossberger. What do you mean? Was it something sexual? I really hope it's not. Walt Moss puppet. Well, I'll look into that. And I'm looking for that also on my iPad, because Walt Moss puppet is the only technology journalist. Is that like a Facebook, like fake Walt Mossberg, basically? It seems like a very old thing. It probably predates. Oh, I see that. That's actually cute the way it looks. Oh, that's cute. Walt Moss puppet. It's still and it's followed by Mark Gurman on Twitter. That's actually funny. Let me just like open a new private window. Why doesn't my I do have the latest betas installed, so that's probably why it doesn't like read my my Mac is like for hands-off stuff. Otherwise, it probably would do so. But if I click this, does it do that? Yeah, so this is Walt Moss Puppet, guys, I guess. That's funny. I like that. I am Walt Moss Puppet. Yeah, those are the good old Facebook days, I guess, before like extreme conspiracy theories, or at least when only like your crazy uncle was believing in that. Sam, you're saying you're specifically referring to the test here where they zoom in and just, oh yeah, I agree. Like their Figma test just. It's like you have like that huge discrepancy, right, between like almost, what was it?
Native 4R20, whereas the X Elite Surface took a minute.
And by the way, one thing that I don't like about the MaxTech guys, they show the results for very, very short periods of time on screen. It makes it almost impossible to catch.
So the Surface took...
Yeah, like this is a pretty big discrepancy.
30...
It's like just saying, oh, they both feel nice to zoom in, obviously does not reflect that difference. And if somebody was like, oh, but they both feel nice to zoom in, well, yeah, but if you're really actually, your work depends on it. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Sam. Benchmarks are good for diagnostic purposes. Well, of course, you're talking to somebody who's finishing med school. But I'm just saying that it's good to have benchmarks that actually like reflect some things in real life. This is why I've actually been super pro Geekbench. I know people want to call it Apple Bench or Meme Bench or whatever bullshit, but it actually seemed to scale, especially single core performance results, very well with basically everything else, right? Now, general responsiveness will also depend on things like how good is your memory, how good is your storage, but in general, single core CPU performance is very indicative of even stuff like gaming. Sometimes games don't use that many threads even. So my complaint with certain benchmarks like 3D Mark, Wildlife Extreme is if you are actually gonna waste time, resources, user attention on like having benchmarks out there, I really want those benchmarks to be representative of something. And unfortunately, 3D Mark, Wildlife, and its extreme variant or not, is not very representative of anything in modern gaming. And even older games just don't perform like this does. Files export, files encoding, conversion, I get that it's real use, but so many of these tests seem oriented with no use case. Yeah, I agree. Like, but also like files export, file encoding and conversion, you have to ask, how often do you do that? Like, even if you work with files, and then you have to think how much of your actual like like workflow, even if you're somebody who works all day, every day with documents, how much of that is actually taken up by files export or encoding and stuff like that? Usually that's just the last step. And this is why, for example, for Final Cut or other video editing apps, actually going through the timeline and saying, does it feel smooth, does it not feel smooth, is actually pretty relevant. Because sometimes you might have export times that are very similar or maybe even in favor of one device, but then the encoders on the other are so much better that your actual video editing experience is a lot better. And one thing I have disliked in like recent MaxTech videos is that they actually had benchmarks. Like they had like Xcode benchmarks, they had I believe a Logic benchmark. Now those weren't fantastic, but those were sometimes they were purely RAM limited and things like that, but they were at least something. And when it comes to comparison between Mac and Windows, they don't really put in the work to like create a Visual Studio coding benchmark, right? They do have friends. They are a 1.2 million subscriber channel. They can have people helping them out with benchmarks that might be at least somewhat representative for like Mac versus PC. And I just find it a little disappointing that what we usually end up having is like, how fast is Lightroom, right? And things like that. Tippermaster, this is generally the problem I've had with YouTubers replacing old school reviewers like AnandTech. I agree. I do think we still need a real pros that do it much more boring. And I wish that the likes of AnandTech could have gone the Gamers Nexus route and could have given us their like in-depth, like pretty anal expertise in video form, so those news sites didn't have to die out. This is why we very positively reacted to the Notebook Check review here, because they made a video. It's pretty short, it's digestible, but they also, of course, have their much more in-depth article. And then the video we looked at in the last stream that actually had like the Fox, right? PHAWX, I believe, that had like gaming benchmarks in it. That was like a 40-minute video. That felt a lot like what a deep breakdown could look like, even from AnandTech. It's just that AnandTech would also give us very, very accurate power consumption metrics and things like that. They would test like spec stuff, which is like a premium benchmark suite that you need to pay for. And yeah, I wish we could have found like a middle ground where like, this is why I do sometimes wish we had like a Gamers Nexus for stuff beyond gaming. And Notebook Check rocks, love their PWM screen tests. Oh, I didn't know they did that.
8% longer than limited optimized for these kinds of ARM chips and for mobile devices. All right, guys, wow, what a difference here. We have 72.4 compared to 38.15. That is a difference of 90%. We have 90% higher on the...
Can you imagine what the 18 core version would do to the Surface? And again, this is Wildlife Extreme. This is the worst GPU test. I hope that he uses Steel Nomad.
M3 Pro, even the
he
bin
has
version.
to.
That is crazy.
If he doesn't,
but
do
now
Steel Nomad,
I want to
I'll
go
be
and test
so
the
angry.
brand new Steel Nomad Lite. This is more of a AAA game title,
but
as far as
he even titled like this part of the video as 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme. Just call it 3D Mark at that point.
Performance testing. So let's run this. And look at this right here. My goodness.
Double.
We have 37.6 compared to 14.4.
Way over double.
That is 2.6 times better frames per second on the...
And this will actually be your result. And this is why raw bandwidth, when it comes to memory bandwidth, means jack shit when you're comparing different architectures. This is an 130 gigabyte per second memory bandwidth. This is 150. Do you think there is a strong memory like limitation here somewhere? Like maybe effective bandwidth thanks to more cache here, but yeah, like this is why I'm saying the X Elite is a very, very unbalanced processor. It's very, very weird in that way.
Max.
And yeah, by the way,
if you're gonna be trying to play some game,
like you can add 20% if you feel like it on top of it. For like the 4.6 teraflops version, it won't help you much, I fear.
I mean, the M3 Pro, even the bin.
And by the way, I asked those guys on Twitter if they had like detailed power consumption metrics for the X Elite right now. And they said that basically the app for it does not work right now or something to that matter. It was very, very late. I don't fully remember.
So much faster. And now let's really push these chips to their limits with Cinebench. I'm going to start the 10-minute throttling test. And on the Mac, we're able to see all our information. So right here, we're going just above 20 watts.
Yeah, this is where we have 20 watts, maybe peak 30. This is where the Surface just... It is so much less efficient.
22 right there I saw at the peak. Unfortunately, with the X Elite, we don't have a lot of information. We have some temps and frequencies. So we saw a peak of 4,000 megahertz.
Tippermaster, each Apple P-Core is actually able to utilize 100 gigabyte per second by themselves. Thanks again to AnandTech. I wonder if Orion cores can. I would be very surprised if they did, because I've seen like like it is also the difference always between like Apple using slower memory, right, but coming in at like faster result. I actually wonder what Qualcomm's support for faster memory sometimes looks like, because they're very, very early on in supporting stuff like 8500 megatransfers per second memory, and things like 9600 I believe will soon be supported and whatever. I feel like they have a very accepting memory controller on their chips that works well with like high frequency or high bandwidth memory, but doesn't actually feed it to the actual processor. And what Apple does is whenever they use faster memory, which obviously costs them money, they make sure that their chip can actually utilize that. And it's not an attack on, it's not like just like blowing up smoke Apple's ass. I believe that it's very similar to what Intel is doing. Intel is also not always the fastest on jumping on the, oh, we have the fastest memory train. Now, obviously, their desktop chips kind of are, but that's because they clock so high, they can generally actually benefit from higher memory bandwidth. But on their laptops, they're like, okay, 7500 megatransfers is like our official spec. We know 8500 exists. We know like technically even higher could exist with LPDDR5T or whatever, but we don't, because we don't believe that our chip can actually maximize it. And I believe that Qualcomm is probably playing a little bit of a dirty game where they want to advertise those high RAM bandwidths, but they don't actually put in the work to utilize them for the CPU, for the GPU equally, right? That both P cores and E cores have some decent access to that bandwidth. That, as you said, Tipomaster, that even individual P cores can access most, if not all, of that bandwidth. I just wanted to call that out because some people will like say, oh, well, Apple still is so far behind like the raw bandwidth or that you find on the A Gen 3. And I look at it and I'm like, where? This just doesn't line up with real world tests.
Here it's 4 gigahertz, but it's only on 2 cores. And right now that we got started, we're running at about 3 gigahertz compared to 3.58. So this is clocking faster. Now, in terms of the temps,
but Apple also has like E-cores that clock at 2.5, 2.6 gigahertz.
It did shoot up pretty quick as well. And of course, the fan is gonna spin up on here. On the Mac right now, we're averaging 88. 95 was the highest we hit, but of course the fans are speeding up. And as far as we know, the actual wattage running this test should be roughly the same, around 23 watts for the system. So it's gonna be a very...
That is not true. I knew. Oh no, Vadim, you went and did it. What do I do about this, guys? Wattage numbers don't always mean the same thing. TDP is not always, and in fact, it's very rarely representative of actual peak power consumption. If you say your device is 23 watts, because that's kind of what your cooling has been built for, that still allows for peaks at like 30, 40, even the 50 watt range. The TDP of a processor is not its actual power consumption, guys. This is how Intel can tell us that their chips have like 100 watt, 20 watt TDPs, and then have peak power consumption metrics in the 300 watt range, or at least way over 250. Oh, God. No. And sometimes, actually, a power metric can actually be overbuilt. Like the RTX 4090 is actually a decent example where it is built for like the actual graphics card, right? Not the GPU, the chip is built for 450 watts, even though very often you will actually run it at like 330 to 350. And then maybe at some point you will hit spikes of around 500 or even 600 watts. And it's for those peaks that you make the GPU 400 watts or 450 watts. When you look at a TDP for a laptop chip, and you will look, for example, how much like even Hawk Point scales, which is like AMD's 8840U, unless you set a limit in firmware to how much power it can draw, you really cannot say both those systems run 23 watts. That is not true. You're saying that to artificially benefit the X Elite.
Interesting comparison. Now, one thing that's really stood out testing these chips is that now they're running at 2500 megahertz across.
And this is probably where you get 23 watts, right? Definitely not at 3 point something gigahertz.
All of the cores, 27, and sometimes it even gets as low as 2200, even though the
By the way, one thing that I do want to, I said it, this is not a kid glove video. One thing I do want to criticize the MacTechs guys a little bit. If an actively cooled Mac had these kinds of like reductions in frequency, across so many cores. Like I know, of course, Apple's cores clock differently in between single-threaded, multi-threaded tasks. But if you suddenly lost 20% of your clock speeds, even though, by the way, Qualcomm explicitly advertises like an multi-threaded like frequencies, they would be saying, oh, this is an overheating mess, this is poorly built, and this is, I believe, way too much benefit of the doubt for the X Elite, because I do believe that this laptop was not targeting 23 watts when it was running at like those original frequencies. Not even close. It was probably at around 40, 45.
Temperatures are fairly low. I hear the cooling system running right now, and it seems almost as if the chip is just being limited by the amount of power that it can have, and because it doesn't get enough wattage, the clock speeds have to drop, and that is just so weird compared to Intel systems and other Macs where typically we're limited by heat. And this is likely because this chip was originally designed for servers at much higher wattages with cooling, but
No, actually servers would probably just no, actually no, that makes no sense, because servers would have actually been much more likely to run at lower frequencies to run at higher efficiency. Usually, like servers do not maximize the available frequency of any given architecture, not even close. This is why Intel Xeon chips are technically the same architecture in many ways. I know it's not quite the same. It's like they're desktop parts, but they run at like half the max frequency. This actually lines up pretty well with it being potentially like originally designed for servers, or maybe validated for like server use cases more than before it was thrown into laptops. But also it's been like 8 months since it was announced for laptops. At this point they should have kind of figured out how to make it all run well. I do believe that this is just the limit, that those max frequencies had nothing to do with 23 watts.
They were able to package it down into an efficient, underclocked mobile chip. And now it's been around 5.5 minutes. The fans are all sped up, everything's stabilized, and the Surface Laptop 7 is running a little bit cooler than the MacBook.
It doesn't, again, you cannot compare actual like temperatures between completely different architectures. The reason for that is you don't even know where exactly like the the temperature sensor is on the die, right? Sometimes it's closer to the center, sometimes it's a little bit further off. Often there are some multitude of sensors that then form like an average. Saying like maybe this one goes 90 watts, 90 watts, this one goes like 85 watts, or 90 degrees, this goes like 85 degrees. That makes no sense as a comparison between completely different devices.
Also a little bit louder. The MacBook has a hum just slightly above ambient. And now I have my thermal cam here, so let's take a look. We're getting 39 degrees or so, the hottest part of the M3 MacBook Pro. You guys can see the dual fans right over there, and let's take a look at the Surface. 46 there.
Yeah, it was running cooler than the Mac, sure bro. So with a lower fan activeness, this one, like it's an 8 degrees difference. Like, come
the
on.
Hottest part. And then we have the heat going to one corner. I think this thing has just a single fan, but we've noticed that these laptops, the chip itself is consistently pretty dang hot, even with fans. And as this is finishing up, I want to mention that even though the fan is louder on the Surface, with all of these X Elite laptops, none of them are crazy loud, and you never have a thing with
Yeah, but like you have to compete with Apple Silicon Macs these days. You aren't competing with 14 nanometer Intel chips anymore. And even on the laptop space, you do have to consider that if you go a lot louder, you generally got a lot more performance. Maybe not as much in CPU, but you can get like an RTX 4060 even in the GP, which will be, for example, very often like combined with like AMD's upcoming Strix Point APU. Then the GPU can just be turned off for regular usage and then be turned on for gaming. And the reason why it can do that is because the Strix Point internal GPU, the what would it be now, the 8 ATM or the 9 ATM, would be just like a lot faster anyway than even the X Elite by itself. But now you can also get the D GPU, and apparently you will be able to still get that kind of combination for around $1,500. So the Surface laptop with the X Elite really has a very, very, very short shelf life before its value proposition gets like questioned hard by AMD competitors.
where you open up a web browser or you're starting up your machine or maybe installing an app and the fans are just ramping up and down. So they've been designed really well, and with this kind of a characteristic, it's much more like a Mac, and it seems like they're okay with the chip maybe getting a little bit hotter or more based off of chassis temperature and keeping the fans from going crazy and blaring like you would get.
I mean, you can still tune that manually in Windows. You probably should. Like, you have those tools.
Intel laptops, and that just gets really annoying. So this is much more like a MacBook. All right, guys, we have...
The issues, though, is that there are Windows laptops that do offer that kind of experience, maybe with slightly worse battery life, and maybe they need a tiny bit bigger cooling inside, right? Maybe it needs like slightly larger fans, right? Or it needs like more copper inside. But you can have that kind of experience on Windows. It's not unique. Like, it's better on Macs, right? And if there was nothing like it on Windows, I could agree. But saying this is like pretending like it's basically a standalone experience on Windows, I just don't agree with that. There are good Windows devices. The guys, I've said that time and time again. This is like an Apple-focused channel, but we do not shit here on good Windows or Android devices, or sometimes on the higher value that even technically worse devices bring, but they're just much better priced, right? This pretending that the Snapdragon X Elite just solves all of those issues in a Mac way, as if nobody has ever attempted it. Again, we already have the 8840U from AMD, and we've had the 7840U for well over a year on the market. I just want to briefly look that up. 7840U, the wiki. When did it come out? Oh my god, it's so hard to always find because it's just an endless list. Ryzen 5. Can I just find it on the page? 7840, 7840U or H, right? And came out in May of 2023. So yeah, basically for over a year. Let's even say like 9 months because it takes a while for a proper laptop rollout. Yeah, this is what I'm saying, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is because it's a 4-nanometer SoC based on a modern architecture, both for CPU and GPU. It games well. It gives you pretty good battery life. I just. Mike, you're saying, I think it was a paid sponsorship, so he doesn't want to be mean, so they keep sending him units. Well, he did make, what was it, the VivoBook video, a sponsored one? I think that's the one that I didn't react to, but this is not sponsored. This is an actual, like, comparison video. He would have had to disclose it in the beginning that it was sponsored.
We have our scores, and we have 881 for the Bind M3 Pro and 836 for this X Elite. So that's only a difference of about 6%.
No, it's not only a difference. You have to consider the lower power consumption. You know that this consumes less power. The fans were running much more quietly. The chassis was much less hot. This points all that this was probably using like 10 watts less to achieve this result.
And between
by the way, where's the single core result?
And now I have Blender opened up right here. We're gonna do the classic BMW test, and there at the hottest spot. We're getting all sped up. Everything's staying now, and it's on the Mac right now. Testing these switchers are being limited by.
Guys, let me know. Did I miss the single core Cinebench result? What happened here? Cinebench, 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 Cinebench. What did they just run? No, guys, this cannot be true. Did I miss it? Please let me know. You guys are watching probably even more so than I am because I'm still super tired from work. No, they didn't run single core results. They just ran multi-threaded Cinebench. That's horrible if true. Why?
M3 Pro and 836.
Yeah, like there's no single core result here. I mean, they could have tested it in very different times or whatever, but why? Like, you already have the time. You're doing this. It's like your job. Like, how much time did you save? I find this a little sussy. Not giving us single core results, which,
for this X Elite. So that's only a difference of about 6% between the two machines.
I'm not a big fan of this.
And now I have Blender opened up right here. We're gonna do the classic BMW test. And right here on the X Elite in the
small criticism, it's not a huge one. The BMW test is not very demanding at this point. It's also very, very quick. On anything even remotely modern, it already was on even like the M1 Max. And there are slightly more, there are slightly better tests. I cannot remember which ones are like the latest ones, but usually there's like an entire like Reddit thing dedicated to like the best Blender tests.
Settings, I want to show you guys that none of these technologies are supported for the X Elite. So we're gonna have to do the basic CPU rendering, whereas on the Mac, you have Metal.
I mean, do both. As I said in the last video, do both. Run it on the CPU on the Mac and then on the GPU too.
It does work really quickly. So now let's go ahead and render this. All right, guys, we have our times here. The MacBook took 21 seconds.
Yeah, how much time does my M1 Max MacBook Pro actually need? I probably would need to test it out in the latest version. Mine doesn't support like ray tracing, but it has a lot of GPU cores and bandwidth. Yeah, they do have Geekbench single core scores. I know that. I know the Geekbench scores out of the top of my head, but I'm specifically talking about Cinebench because I believe that the Cinebench single core test is actually pretty impressive on the M3. Especially considering the long history for the cinema, 4D guys in not building a good Cinebench test for ARM. It's like, spoiler, the M3 wins in Cinebench.
Compared to, get this, 4 minutes.
Because my issue is like when we test like M4 versus X Elite, which is technically the latest chip right from Apple, we currently cannot test a few apps because obviously the M4 is currently bound to the iPad Pro. But once you already have Mac versus PC out there, like you really should get as much data into the ether as possible, because that data, as you can see from my reaction video, will be used by other channels.
It's in 41 seconds for the X Elite. Now, of course, we're not able to use graphics for compute. It's not supported, and that time.
Yeah, but the graphics are so much slower. It would probably be like, what, a minute? Right, still like 3 times slower, something like that.
Not quick. And on the Mac, on the other hand, it even has ray tracing built into the chip, which the X Elite does not.
And guys, can you please let me know quickly, is it confirmed that the Adreno, I believe they call it the Adreno X1, right? Or like the Adreno X or whatever? Is it confirmed that this GPU does not support ray tracing? Because the last 2 generations of Snapdragon chips, both the 8 Gen 2 and Gen 3, support ray tracing. Definitely the Gen 3. Like, is it, like, I'll go to, like, a Nantec. This was their, like, detailed breakdown. And the Adreno X1 GPU, yeah, I remember correctly. It supports ray tracing. What are you talking about? Yassine, for mobile phones, you guess. Yeah, but like, look at this. Of course it supports ray tracing. Oh, you mean like, but on an API level, it supports ray tracing too. It just isn't supported by the actual, like, by the Blender app with the X Elite. That's different from saying it doesn't support actual ray tracing. It supports variable rate shading. It supports ray tracing. It supports mesh shaders. And they say even like an Antec, which again, good compliment here. They say it's like comparable to AMD's RDNA 2 architecture, which is like the architecture that had stuff like sampler feedback, sampling, and mesh shaders. I believe, variable rate shading was also not on RDNA 1. It also came only with RDNA 2. And ray tracing, the hardware acceleration is also RDNA 2. So yeah, that comparison makes a ton of sense. Now, those are older DX12 instruction sets, so maybe the way that those connect to things like Blender, maybe Blender wasn't rewritten for that. I'm not quite sure how Blender like allows access to the API, but like it has all the latest features you need on a hardware level. What you do with it in software, that's a different thing. It's a Qualcomm's implementation with hardware ray tracing, but no hardware BVH processing. So it has, this is a very, very rudimentary implementation of ray tracing when you don't have hardware BVH. BVH, that would be basically like, oh my God, I don't want to explain it because I'm too stupid to explain it. I know what it is. It's like your BVH structure is basically, at least for ray tracing, that's like what your ray tracing like sees in a way. So you can render the actual ray tracing with hardware acceleration, but knowing what the ray tracing actually sees at any given moment, which you can also modify in software, not software, which you can modify on like a game-by-game basis. For example, Spider-Man has a simplified like BVH structure. You cannot really see everything that you would see in game space in its like ray ray tracing BVH. And so yeah, I don't know why I even started explaining it, but yes, this is a rudimentary implementation of ray tracing that is inferior to. I don't actually know if RDNA 3 does hardware accelerated BVH processing, but I do know the latest NVIDIA chips do it. I don't actually know about Apple's architecture. That would be great to know, by the way. If Apple does things like hardware accelerated BVH processing for ray tracing tasks, that would be quite cool. This is why I'm saying it's such a shame that the Anantech guys don't have somebody doing all the same analysis of Apple as they do now with Windows. They've already given up on mobile to a degree. They treat Apple more like a mobile thing, right? They don't analyze it in quite the same way. 72 gigapixels per second fill rate. That's quite low. Because teraflops is one thing, but your actual fill rate, oh hey, they even call it fill rate, I remembered correctly. That one will depend obviously like how many pixels you can drive. That is really like, I would have expected it to be like around 100 or so for a modern chip, like that it would be somewhat competitive. Yet it doesn't look too good. What is gigapixel fill rate PS5? 4.5. Nope. Took just 3. What? Fill rate. Okay. That's gigatexels. 300. Wait, that's the 1080 Ti. But yeah, I believe the PS5 was like in the 400 range or something like that. Maybe I'll find it at some point. The PS5 managed to reproduce a font pixel fill rate of 4.5. Yeah, okay, that was a very specific test. I do not want to annoy you guys with data you didn't come here. And Jan, well, welcome to my loyal German viewer.
So it flies through 3D rendering. So this machine is definitely
not for that. By the way, guys, what we got from what I just looked up, it wasn't just a diversion. And by the way, guys, we just hit. Somebody of you must have subscribed because we were at like 10,900 something subs like yesterday. We just hit 111,000 subscribers, so thank you so much for that. What we just found out, it does support hardware accelerated ray tracing, but it's a very basic solution. And while its 4.6 teraflop number does not look too bad, its gigapixel fill rate number is actually not very impressive. Maybe for a future video, I will look into more detail what the 884U does, what Strix Point does when it comes to stuff like fill rates. Maybe I'll finally find the PS5 numbers that I remember somewhere in my head to be like around 400 or whatever, which is not to conflate it with the PS5's memory bandwidth, which is, I believe, is 448 gigabyte per second. But yeah, I got lost. I apologize.
And just to prove the point, I went ahead and I ran the same render using CPU only on the MacBook. Nice. Using graphics or ray tracing, and it took 2 minutes and 42 seconds compared to that 441.
That graph makes no sense. It should be around here. Okay, that's funny. There something is up with their graphs recently. Maybe they just really wanted to make it look phallic, right? Like balls and D.
So the X Elite, it was faster in Geekbench. It was almost as fast in Cinebench. But here, instead of having 6% difference in Cinebench, we have a difference of 73%. It took 73% longer than the Mac. So that is just crazy. Now, of course, this is also emulated running Blender here, but typically we saw like a 10% hit in performance.
Yeah, and this is why I'm trying to tell you guys, Cinema 4D, as a CPU test, which is what we call Cinebench, unfortunately is not really good. Like, it's just not how people, like, the app behind Cinebench, Cinema 4D, is a GPU, primarily a GPU app these days. This is what it gets optimized for. The fact that we do get a decent CPU benchmark out of it is obviously not bad, but it's not even remotely what you would like call like, oh, this is like a no-brainer test or whatever. Like, no, when you actually look at other tests now, granted, Blender could also be suffering through translation layer stuff. I'm not even sure. Let me briefly look at that up. Blender 4.1, blender.org. Is there a native version for Windows? Download Windows, download Blender for Windows. New in Blender. Yeah, I don't need all features, but like, can you not give me like Blender Windows on ARM? A quick summary, the PR support for Windows ARM devices to Blender. Okay, so it does support it from like 9 months ago or whatever. Does Blender run on ARM-based processors? Hello, I'm using Blender on the Mac. Blender and Windows on ARM. Just a quick announcement that we are now delivering native Windows ARM 64 builds of Blender via our build bot. Which version is that? Because that's 6th of May. Because that would be at least somewhat like to the defense of the X Elite. Oh my God, what is up with the Blender website? This is why I hate doing any kind of extra research during streams, because it then becomes like victim to stuff like this. What? Apple Silicon, Mac OS. So with Mac, you can differentiate between Mac and between Intel and yeah, Windows. You can have like those different things. Oh my God, guys! It's a developer upgrade. How much can you put on that freaking website? Guys, if you enjoy watching me frustratingly look at the devtalk.blender.org website, please smash the like button. Share out the video to anybody who you think might watch me watch the devtalk.blender.org website upgrade as if this is like an Elden Ring boss. And of course, subscribe to the channel, comment during the live stream, and if you want to support this channel directly, leave a super chat, leave a super sticker, or subscribe to my Patreon. Oh my God, this. Okay. No idea. I'll open up the website in 5 minutes.
Applications, but this just shows you the real world scenarios where you can run an app that might not be optimized, and then the chip doesn't do a great job for this specific task as well. You can have a big difference in performance. And now let's get into some other creative apps. I have Adobe Lightroom Classic opened up right here. We've tested it a couple times in previous videos, and it actually works quite fast, even though it's emulated. Now, before we export these 50 edited high resolution images, I want to do a couple things that a lot of people are using, and this is what's going to use the NPU. So we have, let's go with the sky first. I'm going to click it at the same time. So right there on the Mac, definitely a lot quicker, probably twice as fast or 3 times faster.
Wasn't it? This is also where we talked about like the difference between things like teraflops for the GPU and then like actual pixel fill rate. Now we see the difference between like a neural processor that might have significantly lower peak like teraops but with maybe better bandwidth support for the actual like NPU cores, or maybe just in general better cores that just maybe don't go up to as high in terms of the teraops range, you can be much faster, even though technically this is like what, 18 tops or something like that, and this is 45 tops.
Let's go ahead and add another one here. We'll use that AI to
But I also would be surprised if this was using just the neural engine. Stuff like this deserves to be also GPU accelerated. It's just good to share basically that workload.
select the subject. Bam, done on the Mac almost instantly. Here it is looking. Bam, once again, that is roughly 3 times quicker.
Let us do, okay, devtalkblender.org is incapable of opening itself up on Safari. Oh, I apologize. Bless me, I guess. Blender on ARM, Blender Windows on ARM. It's quite possibly, is there like a news thing to it? Demonstration at Microsoft. New quality for Windows on ARM laptops benchmarked. It's all in the context of the X Elite. Blender, Windows on ARM, native. I just want to figure it out. It's a valid to run and would work beautifully. Does Blender run on ARM-based processors? Blender has its native Word, does not support to be open inside. Try an ARM Linux distro and the ARM builds of Blender on Parallels. Okay, so there are ARM builds for Blender, which I will take as it does support Windows on ARM. It just doesn't support all the direct API access for the X Elite.
Almost instant compared to sitting and waiting. Now I'm gonna just flip through some of these images here, and switching through is still pretty quick, even though this does.
And this is where, Samhain, we get
now,
to like what you said, where you said like you don't like how stuff feels. This is also something where like just scrolling through individual results, that will through individual photos, that will be like limited at some point because it's just instantaneous. And to me, it just feels like this test of like, oh, we go from one 40 megapixel image to the next. That one has been good enough on like the 8 gigabyte let's say the 8 gigabyte M2 with the super slow 256 gigs of storage. Even there, it's okay. You wonder if they will release a desktop ARM version. Well, they will be like releasing like a Mac Mini, basically competitor with the Snapdragon X Elite, but and they are supposedly saying that they will be making desktops with the X Elite, but I honestly would be very surprised if this generation, like the X Elite 1, basically gets a desktop counterpart. It's just like, and I don't mean like counterpart as like an extra chip. I mean if it gets put into, because there will not be an X Elite double Elite or something like that. Evan is saying, you're about 45 minutes behind on our stream, but you've been watching for an hour. What an absolute champ. Thank you for the continued support. I really, really appreciate it. I did originally want to make this video a little shorter, but as I say, guys, whenever you're like very engaged in the chat, that encourages me to keep going, even if my voice is a little hoarse, as you can hear right now. Yeah, so I just wanted to tell you, thank you so much for supporting this channel. Views have been recently up. Well, engagement has been up. So basically, like average view duration has been up on this channel, like more comments, more likes, things like that. So I always want to encourage. I hate being like the guy, but like, and even by the way, the reason why I call out for super chats and super stickers and things like that, I did turn off ads for my live streams. So you are not watching my live streams and then getting like ads in between, well, while I'm live. You will get ads once the video has been like normally uploaded to YouTube. But this is partially why I'm asking for super chats, super stickers, Patreon subscriptions. It's because now like half of my actually engaged views for every one of my videos are now completely unmonetized, except for the potential for super chat, super stickers, and things like that. So I'm really trying to improve your user experience. And if you feel like you can give back a little to the channel, I really would appreciate that.
Room, the mobile web kind of based one for cloud, that is optimized. It's written for ARM, but some of these other programs, if you like to use classic, like a lot of professional photographers like, well, it is going to be a little bit of a wait for all these apps to get optimized.
I would love to know how Photoshop behaves on these devices, because as far as I know, it does have a native ARM version, but it's Photoshop, right? It's an Adobe app. They're very notorious for not perfectly executing, to put it nicely. So I would love to see somebody properly test. Also, like those Puget benchmarks, right? Those would be very nice to see. Just as Gemini or ChatGPT, and you'll be fine, lol, even though it's a bit bad habit. For what? Oh, you mean like for stuff like for what I was looking for like things like Blender and whatever? It's hard because often those results are false. I've tried that. Like I play around with like Copilot on Bing, and it's very often like not super correct. And sometimes in like more obscure questions, it like just gives you completely weird result. And sometimes there will be like a news discussion of like, well, Blender will go like live as a Windows on ARM version on this and that date. And then it will use that data, but then maybe somewhere in between, like it was delayed, or maybe something was actually released early or whatever, or there was already a beta version that they might be using. And that is stuff that ChatGPT definitely struggles with.
And set up. And now let's go ahead and export all 50 of these. So the MacBook took 43 seconds to do this, whereas the X Elite took 1 minute and 38 seconds. It took more than twice as long.
Yeah, this is what you also get from like not only more versus the M3, of course, you get more cores and stuff like that. Here, you also get the benefit of faster SSD storage, even a tiny bit extra memory, a tiny bit more memory bandwidth too. And yeah, of course, Apple's single core is also better.
Now in Lightroom, the mobile version, like I said, it is quicker, but it is still nowhere near the speed of the MacBook Pro. And now let's test something that is fully optimized. This is DaVinci Resolve, and we have the new version released for Windows ARM.
Yeah, this is, I believe somebody was like asking for it in the beginning of the stream. If you are excited for that, then this is basically the best thing about this video, which is now results for DaVinci Resolve.
This can actually use the GPU to its full capability, so there's no excuses here. And this is a 4K Blackmagic RAW file with denoising.
Okay, so it's not accelerated by the media encoders or decoders. It just has to run through the CPU.
Test out the compute performance of the graphics.
Well, it will stress the CPU too.
Let's just go ahead and run this. It is really tough. It's going to give us a frame rate, and we'll see what this thing can handle. Now on the MacBook, it's already playing. We're getting 9 to 10 frames per second. So that is pretty good for this binned chip. And on the X Elite, it was glitching up and now started running. We're getting 0, 1, 2 frames per second, back to 1 frame per second, back to 2. So 4 times faster on the Mac to be more conservative, more like 5 or 6. So as far as the graphics compute performance, this is 5x the performance on the MacBook. That is crazy. You could see right there, the graphics is at 98, 99%.
Now this is the binned version with 3.8 teraflops, so let's be fair, maybe it could have run at 2.5 frames per second on the fully unbinned version. Let's not be unkind to it. It might be 4 times slower than the Mac, not 6 times slower. Of course, you cannot dare compare it to the Mac, to even the M3 Pro with 18 GPU cores.
100. It is fully optimized.
By the way, and this is a discussion I think, Sam, I have with you often on Twitter, which is, well, not directly with you, but like Apple Tree and then with you. But I hope that Apple goes back to 256-bit bus on the M Pro, because I feel like if competition really picks up, not necessarily through this generation of the X Elite, but maybe an X Elite 2, and whenever AMD upgrades to 3 nanometer next year, I just would hope that Apple doesn't limit the Pro with like bandwidth and way too little GPU cores. We are overdue like an uptick in actual GPU core count. So, in my opinion, the Max absolutely deserves to be like this standalone behemoth. I hope that at some point it goes to like 60 GPU cores. Obviously 512-bit bus, but now also like coming with faster memory too. But the M Pro, I hope, will not be limited in the way, like the M3 Pro is basically a side-graded M2 Pro in most ways, but it does have the newer GPU architecture with ray tracing, mesh shading, things like that, and it has obviously its newer CPU cores, so it has faster single core performance, and because it's on 3 nanometer, it's more efficient overall. But when it comes to raw performance, including stuff like multi-threading, and even just like raw rasterization, when we ignore things like ray tracing, it's really basically the same, which is a little bit of a shame in my opinion.
But that's the performance we're getting. All right, let's try some playback. Here's some Blackmagic Raw footage with a LUT applied, and we're just gonna see how smoothly this plays. On the Mac, perfectly smooth, 23.97 frames per second. It has a lot of overhead for extra effects or layers. Here, we had stuttering. We still see stuttering right here. It's not able to play this back, even though it's fully optimized. I'm not seeing really the
I don't know if it's fully optimized. It's Windows on ARM optimized. That does not mean it's optimized for this specific chip. But given that it's the only like major Windows on ARM like chip release this year, yeah, it's kind of like you as an end consumer really shouldn't care if like, oh, Windows on ARM gives you like full like great support for the X Elite or not. You should just hope it does. Now, to a contrary example would be Blender on the Mac, which went Windows on ARM, but wasn't really fully metal optimized for quite a while. So maybe something like this can be happening. Maybe it's capable of running a lot faster. I would like an M3 as a counterexample to see if maybe it's closer. Maybe it's 50% faster, and then you would see like scaling in line with GPU performance, but like the Steel Nomad test, for example. But yeah, it is what it is. As an end consumer, the only thing you care about is that you can get the $1,700 MacBook Pro with more memory, way faster storage, a way better screen, way better speakers, and in stuff like video editing, it will outperform it by 6x.
Frame rate, I can go into the color tab here and it'll give me an actual frame rate for it.
Master, I think Jen Husen is not subtly hinting at okay. It's not hitting at NVIDIA WA chip next year. Michael Dell even told an interviewer to ask him again next year. Yeah, that would be interesting. Now, we are a little bit limited in what NVIDIA can do, partially, because obviously they don't own ARM the way they wanted to, but we have seen how just ambitious like the X92 core is, that is like optimized for 3 nanometer, and NVIDIA does have some expertise with ARM SoCs because obviously they do design the X1 chip for the Switch. Which, yes, it's very old at this point, but it's something. And they will be also launching, obviously, a new chip next year for the Switch 2. And then, yeah, I would believe that they would want to launch an ARM core. an ARM SoC. It's just, I don't know, like I don't even know how much like TSMC capacity Nvidia wants to waste at this point, because everything they do is like going basically right back into their AI and server stuff. This is their bread and butter right now. This is what they care most about. This is what briefly got them to over $3 trillion on the market. Let me, by the way, briefly check what's the market cap of Nvidia today. Oh, it's actually 3.1. It went up a little bit again. But yeah, I'm just trying to say that if they do make a Windows on ARM thing, it would be very interesting, and I will definitely give it the kind of attention that I'm giving the X Elite right now.
We're playing back at 12 frames per second.
And to be honest, they do have some expertise now with ARM beyond, obviously, like working with a Nintendo, is they also have some stuff like that for the servers, because ARM CPUs are in general more efficient. But like their highest end versions, I believe, have AMD CPUs on them. I don't know if that changed.
Of 24, so this thing's maxed out, and it looks like our energy saver just kicked in, so we got low enough that it decided, hey, let's cut down the performance. That's at 19%. Interesting. Yeah. Let's go ahead and turn this off, and you guys can see our graphics is pretty much maxed out here, and we're not getting good performance. Whereas on the Mac, right now we're at 47% graphics usage with perfect playback, 46% right there.
That means it's way over 4 times faster.
You basically have 4x the performance in terms of graphics compute, 5x. Wow. This is standard 4K footage with a little bit of effects applied.
I would say there's a strong chance that this is not indicative of a 4 or 5x like raw compute advantage. I would say this probably also plays into like the way that system level cache works, where Apple can probably really get great results out of having the CPU and the GPU work on just one thing, and they share that task on one piece of cache. Like I don't know if it might be. We've seen like gaming benchmarks. They aren't 5 to 6x like this is. I think this is like an interplay between like components like the CPU and the GPU. And we might also be seeing some of the difference, like what some of you have pointed out, that like Apple's P cores are amazing at utilizing the bandwidth, right? So if Apple can share like some cache and like all of the bandwidth between CPU and GPU, that results in a lot less duplicating of tasks, a lot less extra unneeded communication, which means that your CPU and GPU can just run full force, or in this case 47%, and get the task done, while this probably has like a less efficient communication between CPU and GPU, probably way less system level cache, definitely a lot less, we know that, but yeah, it is what it is, unfortunately. This is why I'm saying this does feel like a server chip, or it feels, more importantly, it feels like a architecture validation chip, right? Where they didn't bother with adding efficiency cores, they didn't bother with adding a GPU cores that are actually in line with a 12P core chip. This feels like, oh, are our Orion cores good enough to ship? And this came out of it, and they were like, well, it needs a GPU. Here's like the Adreno X or whatever. It needs bandwidth. Well, we're not going with a 192-bit bus for a GPU that small. Certainly not 256 bits. So might as well just give it a 128-bit bus. And all the rest just suffers along.
And this should be pretty easy because you have hardware decoders. We're going to have hardware encoders. This is like the optimal scenario. As you guys see, they are both playing back perfectly. So it is handling your basic simple footage. So that part of it at least is good. You're not gonna be able to stack a ton of effects or do some real serious work, but for basic 4K, it is playing it back. And now let's render this 5-minute project, and this is gonna test out the speed of the built-in encoders. Apple, they haven't updated it from the M1, the M2, and now the M3. This is the new X Elite.
This is a little bit unfair. Like, they do upgrade them. They make them a little more efficient. They've also like optimized like the Max chips to utilize, or like the Ultra chips to utilize several encoders simultaneously. They do work. It's just that they were so far ahead with the M1. It's honestly hard to like improve that much on H.264 and H.265 encoders. I believe in the future, like the encoders that Apple will keep improving will be ProRes and AV1. And adding AV1 was part of like their big thing recently.
And it looks like we're running at about 29.5, about 30 FPS compared to about 90 on the MacBook with really old encoders. I believe
those are not really old encoders, but if it helps you, I mean, this is the X Elite even more than it already did, but okay.
M4, they finally have updated it once M4 Max launch, but let's see how long this takes. The MacBook's been done for a while here, and looking at the X Elite, our graphics is maxed out. The 3D engine is roughly half or so for the effects, but the decode is what is maxing this out right here. All right, guys, we have a minute and 21.
By the way, one thing I do want to say, with how stuff is treated in software, a lot of people just like shit on Apple for 8 gigs of RAM, and I understand. But I do want to tell you guys, the way that a lot of these systems work is that very often they will give only half the available only half the available memory to the GPU. Now, because it's an SoC, it's not quite as simple as like seeing as completely split off memory the way you would see it like if you have like a dedicated GPU. But Apple does not do this. You can have like an 8 gigs Apple Silicon Mac that gives you the entire 8 gigabytes for the GPU. And this is why I also want to say a lot of people don't understand how numbers behave in the real world. Like a system might be 16 gigabytes of unified or shared memory on the X Elite, but then you compare it to a Mac with 18 gigs of memory, and you're like, well, why does my GPU say I'm limited to 7.7 gigabytes?
Maxing this out right here. All right, guys, we have a minute and 21 compared to 4 minutes and 12 seconds. So the MacBook is 3 times faster in these very simple 4K video tasks, and up to 6 times faster for more complex things. That is a crazy difference that I was not expecting. Now, I want to do a quick test on this plugged in just to see if we have a difference. But first, I want to go ahead and take a look at our battery life. We turned off that energy mode as soon as it kicked on when we were doing the previous test. So our MacBook here is at 25% battery life remaining. We've been shooting for hours and hours doing all of these tests. And the Surface is at 7% battery life. So this is still good as far as if you're comparing to the older Intel-based systems.
Yeah, but you already saw behavior like you did in Cinebench, right? Where it was like, oh, like why doesn't it clock to the max frequencies? Well, that's why.
But the MacBook is ahead in terms of overall.
Now, to be in the defense of the Surface Laptop 7, this does have a larger battery. It's just that I fully believe that I don't know what these guys are doing when it comes to like fully like standardizing like nits when it comes to display brightness. So I would take these tests with a grain of salt. They usually do it more like, oh, it feels about the same. But yeah, the Mac will give you better battery life for pro workflows. It's without a doubt.
Efficiency, speed in the real world, and battery life when you're pushing it. Let's go ahead and plug in this system. And as you guys can see, it's showing 4 minutes, 5 seconds, 4, 3. It usually jumps up and down. So that's showing us that it's still gonna take the same time. We were not limited by any sort of on battery performance, any sort of caps, or even the battery life being low. That is just the performance that you get. So what is our main conclusion? What did we find in these tests? You guys wanted the X Elite against the M3 Pro. We did it, and we saw that in pretty much everything, the 14-inch with the binned weaker M3 Pro ended up beating it out. The only thing it didn't is multi-core in Geekbench 6, but that was literally a 1% difference. But in all the real-world tasks, unoptimized or optimized, the 14-inch is a better...
And by the way, this is why I've said the MaxTech guys don't have much to lose when it comes to their like Apple-focused audience by sucking up to the X Elite a little. They can use like their first 2-3 videos to compare the X Elite versus the M3 MacBook Air. They can talk about the value of those devices that, for example, have like 1 terabyte of storage at $1,300. And then they can proceed to compare it to a discounted M3 Pro MacBook Pro, destroy it in every reasonable metric. Then they can still talk nicely about options like having OLED screens on those, and they can talk about how, oh, X Elite is still better for battery life when it comes to Windows devices, right? But fundamentally, if somebody asks them, well, why don't you use an X Elite? They will be able to point to videos like this and say like, well, it doesn't beat the actual like higher end MacBook Pros, like outside the one with the M3. Why should I?
Machine. Now, if you're willing to spend a little bit more money than this Surface Laptop 7, you are getting a better machine. You're getting the speakers, the mini LED display, you're getting the better ports, you're getting better battery life. And in terms of real world performance, especially for creative tasks, especially for graphics and graphics tasks for compute performance, the difference is really big. And with that said, with the regular M3 in this machine, even though some of the benchmarks would have been lower, the real world performance tasks would have still beat it out in terms of, you know, Blender, in terms of the Figma.
Yeah, GPU acceleration, single core performance, just in general, better optimization for the last few years for macOS. Then you get, of course, Apple-specific apps, Xcode, Final Cut Pro, Logic. You even like your like speedometer test, you can get like a certain performance out of Chrome on both systems, but then you have the significantly better efficiency of Safari. Beyond that, you also, of course, have even things like Apple's Pages, Keynote numbers, which will always be decently optimized and free for that matter. So yeah, and then of course, Apple's media encoders and decoders are better across the board on M3, will be way better on M4 with like AV1 support. Well, I believe the M3 does some M3 Apple AV1. Apple confirms M3 family has AV1 hardware decoding, so not encoding. And does M4 have hardware encoding or also only just decoding? They say only decoding. That's a little unfortunate. But then we know what will be coming. Well, this is one thing that I could see a difference, though. I could see the M4 Pro and the M4 Max introducing AV1 encoders, right? Not just decoders. This is not too different from how the M1 Pro and the M1 Max introduced ProRes decoders and encoders versus the M1, which didn't have it, which the M1 is more similar to the A14, and then the A15 came around and it had ProRes, obviously, because the iPhone 13 Pro could actually record and then play back ProRes, but the M1 never got that functionality. Like we didn't get like an M1.5 with those capabilities. Instead, we got M1 Pro and M1 Max with ProRes, and then the M2 was the base level chip that got it. So I could actually see that being part of the M4 Pro and Max.
In terms of video editing, it is still faster on that. So we still really like the Surface Laptop 7.
I have to say though, it's a little bit of a shame that they're testing like the M3 Pro with video editing workloads, but they didn't show that for the M3, and now they're saying the M3 is faster. Well, if the M3 is faster, then why wasn't that, or if it's slower, and if you have the data, why didn't you include it?
With the X Elite. If you need a Windows system, we love this machine. It is a great value. You get way better battery life than you did with Intel. It's not.
Yeah, AMD does not exist, guys. The 7840U, the 8840U in 2 weeks, this is Strix Point APU, none of that exists.
Nice. It's a good machine. And if you use it for regular office tasks, you know, use it for web browsing, emails, CPU related tasks, you want a nice screen, webcam, it is a good machine, but it is not a powerhouse for creatives or for graphics.
That is correct. I like that. I like that final conclusion. Everybody wins because competition is always a great thing. It's such a lukewarm toast. Like, no, I will skip this gen. Are we going to ignore the fact that the 14-inch MacBook Pro has it has 72 watt-hour battery versus the Surface has 54 watt-hour battery, so efficiency isn't actually that much better. This, no offense, but when iPhone wins a slight lose the battery life against Android phones with much larger batteries, did you jump out and say this is fanboy behavior on both sides? The difference here in battery life is that the M3 Pro was actually getting you real work done relatively quickly. That is where battery life will be actually to your advantage, because that's battery life you can actually utilize, because a task gets done and you can move on to the next task. That is obviously very different from, and of course I said already that like stuff like matching brightness levels, MaxTag is not the greatest for that. I don't even know if they have like a luminance test device, but yeah, it is what it
still
is.
wins, and thankfully with those killer sales, you can pick one up for a great price. But you guys let me know what you...
Okay, guys, I think I'll be wrapping this up here, actually. I'm actually pretty happy with this video. I think they've actually done a better job here than in the first few. For one, I've always said that the M3 Pro is the true competitor to the X Elite rather than the M3. There are some things that I disagree with, like them saying, oh, they are both 23 watts. That's not how TDPs work. Just because the chip is rated for 23 watts doesn't mean it's completely limited to 23 watts. While the number you actually saw on the Mac was the actual like active power consumption number at like 22 to 24 watts. And I'm glad to finally see, like in the last video, we went through gaming stuff. Now that was mainly against like other Windows chips, so I would love to see like proper comparisons for example, World of Warcraft and other natively available apps, games that are shared between Windows on ARM and macOS. But we finally saw also more productivity apps. So definitely our list or like our raw amount of data is adding up, and I will keep adding on to that. Thank you so much for joining. I will not be streaming tomorrow, and most likely not on Thursday either, because I'm cutting my work week a little short and actually going to visit family. I do have some stuff to do, so I might stream this week, like this work week, but I'm not sure. I will let you know. As always, the best place to find out is to follow me on Twitter. The link is in the description of this channel, because this is where I also communicate beyond the videos. And of course, thank you so much for joining, for making this once again a super lively chat. We once again hit close to 20 simultaneous viewers, which is pretty great. And as always, if you're watching this and enjoying this, please leave a like. It helps out tremendously. Please subscribe to the channel. Obviously, anything that grows the community is tremendous. Share it out to anybody who you think might enjoy it. Same principle. Comment, please don't just comment on the live chat. Please also comment on when a video has already been uploaded. That helps out tremendously, and pretty much nobody does but 2 or 3 guys. And I would love to change that. And beyond that, I just cannot thank you enough for this experience. Whenever you catch me live, as I said, please consider giving a small donation in the form of a super chat or a super sticker. But also, when the video has already been uploaded, you can leave what is called a super thanks, which works in a very similar way. And if you want to support this channel directly in the long term, there is obviously Patreon. Link to that is in the description of this channel. That wraps it up for this video. Thank you again so much for making this X Elite coverage very, very interesting for me. As you guys have seen, I also learned through making these videos. So it's not just me coming in with like a lot of preconceived notions or anything. I come in, I watch the videos, I try to analyze them as fairly as I can. I go through articles, I research stuff, sometimes on the site on my iPad. Sometimes we try to go to devblender.org and it doesn't do anything, but we try. That's the most important thing, I guess. So thank you so much. It's now an almost 2.5-hour stream, which I didn't expect to be doing, but you guys were so engaged. I really felt like continuing it. So thank you for motivating me. And as always, let me know what else you would like to see me cover. There's obviously a lot in the world of, like, I said it already in my last video. I don't know if I ever get to that, but like I would like to cover like rumors for the Galaxy S25 Ultra as we get closer to like the iPhone 16 season. So now we have to talk about it and its competitors a little more. We have talked about like the M4 devices supposedly coming at the M4 Max coming at the end of this year. So, but I would like to cover that in like a separate video. So a lot of things on my shelf, and let me know what you would like to see me else put on that shelf beyond obviously my beautiful silver play button. But that's about it for this video. Thank you so much again. See you next time. This is Mark Tech tuning out.